This is a ZTE Axon M. It came out back in 2017 as one of, if not the first, modern folding phone. This phone failed for a number of reasons, but before it was eventually banned from being sold in the US back in August of 2018, it was reviewed pretty moderately, with one of the main flaws being the high price. It cost $725 in 2017, which was almost the same cost as the Galaxy S8 from the same era. The performance was average but still worse than the Galaxy S8's, and much worse than the iPhone 8's A11 processor. This device had the Snapdragon 821, which was worse than the Galaxy S8 and Pixel 2, which both had the Snapdragon 835, which outperformed the 821. The ZTE had 4GB of RAM, which was pretty good for the time, but one of the things I think it did particularly well was actually the camera. I like this phone's camera. It was a pretty high-resolution camera, and things actually do look pretty good coming out of it. Here are a few examples. The main feature of this phone was the dual displays, which I actually like, but there were a few problems with this still. The secondary display would fold out to the back of the phone, which means whenever the phone is placed down on a table, it can get scratches pretty easily. Cases didn't really exist for this phone, but screen protectors and protective films seem to exist. My model right here that I have actually has a lot of scratches on the back and front, and that seems to be the case with most of them on eBay and other third-party resellers. There were 4 modes for the display, but only 2 of them make sense to use. For my usage, the worst mode is Extended Mode, surprisingly. It will extend the OS so that it can be used across the OS pretty much, which sounds weird, but for a single large display, instead of 2 smaller displays for multitasking, the problem is the hinge in the middle, since in the end, the displays are separate, and it's not just a single large display like the Samsung Galaxy Folds have. There seems to be no real benefit to using it like this anyway. The second mode that I think is useless is the mode where the phone is folded out but one display is turned off. This is an actual mode that the phone came shipped with, and it makes no sense why the user wouldn't just fold the display in. I think one of the 2 useful modes is mirroring mode. It will mirror whatever is on the first or primary display to the secondary display, which makes sense because if the phone is on a table, 2 people can watch the same content or see the same things on the same phone. The most useful mode, though, in my usage, is the multitasking mode, where 2 apps can be open at once, with one app on the first display and another app on the second display. This mode is actually really useful, and I think that this is the one thing that dual screen phones do better than folding phones like the Galaxy Fold. I like how it's not just one massive display, in that there's an actual physical border separating the displays, much like how dual monitors work on a computer. One problem that I found with this phone is the camera. It's annoying to take a photo because the camera is on the main display. There is no way to swap the displays that I've found, so whenever the user wants to take a picture, the phone has to be flipped around completely and switched to the secondary display, which takes longer to do and it's just inconvenient. The only benefit that the phone receives from this design is that the front-facing camera will be better than other phones' front-facing cameras, since it does 2 jobs as the primary and the front-facing camera. The main reason this phone failed was a lack of brand recognition. Most people didn't know who ZTE was, and would rather buy from a reputable brand like LG or Samsung on the Android front. When a regular consumer saw this dual-screen phone from a brand that nobody's heard of in an AT&T store next to something like the Galaxy S8 or iPhone X, from brands that people have heard of, the more recognizable brands just make more sense to buy from. Another thing that I will say is that this type of folding phone still exists, but it's not doing too well. The Microsoft Surface Duo lineup, released in 2020, has tried the same concept, but in my opinion, executed a bit better with fully fold-around hinges and a better build quality. But it seems like nobody wants to buy a phone from Microsoft after the Windows Phone disaster of the early to mid-2010s. How did the Axon M end, though? In August of 2018, the US banned ZTE and Huawei from selling their phones in the US because of security concerns. So this phone, alongside other ZTE and Huawei phones, were no longer a thing on the US market. And the US market is pretty big for a phone manufacturer, so to be completely banned from the market really did kill this phone. I'm not sure how well this phone did in other countries, but I'd assume not that good because I've never seen any model that's not from the US. So with that said, Thank you for watching this video on this very interesting phone that never came to be all that it was expected to be. If you enjoyed this video, a like would be appreciated, and with that said, goodbye.